Hi, sweet beans. Welcome back to Wild Geese. I'm your host, Anna. Today, I want to talk about the relationship between intimacy and performance. I started thinking about this a few weeks ago, and when I first wrote it down, I wrote intimacy versus performance because they instinctively feel like they're in contention with each other. You know, like performativity is largely a word that's used online now to say that something feels fake or inauthentic. And the implications of a performance are that you're putting on a mask or a character that you would need to drop in order to access intimacy. But as I've been working through this episode, I've kind of changed my own mind about that dichotomy, which is fun. So we'll talk through that. The question I have really been asking myself is, how can I maintain my own sense of safety and boundaries through performance while also being like grounded enough in the sensations of my own body to drop that performance and tap into intimacy? And I want to think about this as it applies to our private and our public lives. So we'll talk about this as it applies to sex, gender, our own personal decision making, and then we'll also talk about how it shows up online. I don't think I'm going to get too personal about my sex life on this episode because there are creepy people on the internet. Also, I have family members that watch Wild Geese, but I will be talking about sex. And if that makes you uncomfortable, go ahead and click away. If you are a family member, go ahead and click away. Love you so much. If you are a perverted incel, you will be blocked. Those are my ground rules. Before we get into the meat of today's episode, though, I did start a vlog channel. So if you want to go check that out, that's just kind of a different side of my personality. I feel like sometimes my silly, goofy side comes out in Wild Geese for sure, but I feel like that's where she really has a lot of room to play. Basically, I talked myself out of vlogging for such a long time because I was like, this is inconsequential, this is silly, but I was doing a silly little edit for someone else and it was making me laugh. And I just thought to myself, like, why does this not matter? Why am I talking myself out of doing this? This is a fun thing that's making me laugh. I'm gonna make myself laugh. All right, so I'm in Dallas right now, and I've been vlogging a little bit while I'm here. It's just so stunningly beautiful. I want to capture it all. But this decision to start vlogging because it's the fun thing and not because it's the thing that other people might tell me is like strategically the most productive thing to do. That sort of decision, I think, comes from having a level of intimacy with yourself. Because I think obviously real intimacy, even with yourself, requires honesty. And honesty sometimes can be very uncomfortable. In a very basic way, I haven't always been super honest with myself was when I have in the past ignored my own health. And I think that happens to a lot of us where you just prolong booking that appointment. You keep telling yourself, oh, I'll do it next week. And I get it. The whole process can feel really inconvenient and awkward for something that should just be simple. That's why I want to talk about today's sponsor, ZocDoc, because it helped me get out of my own way, and I think it could help you too. ZocDoc is a free website that helps you find and book in-network, high-quality doctors, all based on your own preferences. Instead of calling around not knowing if a doctor even takes your insurance, you just go to their website, search for doctors in your area, see who's in network, read real reviews from real patients, and actually compare your options, and then you just book. Instantly. No back and forth, no waiting on hold, done. I found an appointment within a couple of days, and something about how easy this was just made me realize how overcomplicated I was making it. I don't want that for you. So ZocDoc has thousands of doctors across tons of specialties, and it is completely free to use. I've personally built my entire care team on ZocDoc. So I've got a primary care doctor that never makes me feel rushed. I've got a dermatologist that always makes me understand what's happening with my own skin so that I'm not just following trends that will hurt my skin further. There's no reason to keep seeing doctors that don't work for you, and appointments can happen super fast, usually within 24 to 72 hours of booking. Sometimes you can even make same-day appointments, so if you've been putting it off, I'm not judging. I've been there too. But your health matters to me. Your health is worth making the time to make the appointment, and you'll feel a lot better once you have. Just clicking the link in the episode description is a huge step towards prioritizing your health. Go to ZocDoc.com/Anna Howard and book your appointment with a top-rated doctor today. Thank you to ZocDoc for sponsoring today's episode and for helping us all take better care of our health. Now let's get back to today's video. But the thing that got me thinking in the direction of this episode was this Tumblr text post by a femimaniac. A Tumblr text post is my favorite way to start an episode. Like, how unserious can we get? But it says, transactional thinking is the death of eroticism. Taking what you want is already giving more than giving what you think is desired. Two people could have entirely unenjoyable sex because they both think they're doing what the other person wants, hoping they'll get back what they want in exchange. On the other hand, two people could act entirely selfishly and both both get exactly what they want when there's compatibility between desires. Good sex is found in the overlap of desire, not in a turn-based game of what do you want. Stop giving head because you want to be given head or vice versa. What are you, a heterosexual? Which, sorry, heterosexuals. And it was interesting when I read this because I wrote down in my notes, holy shit, this is what I've been learning that feels too private to talk about. But then I was thinking about it and I was like, I actually have talked about this before. Like, I have an entire episode on the transactional language around our relationships, but I hadn't like directly talked about how it applies to sex before. And then that had me thinking about like, I can intellectually know things, right? I can intellectually know things and talk about things and perform a knowing. But an embodied lesson is slightly different. And I think me actually learning this on like a felt level, past intellectually knowing it, and then coming back around to talk about it again, doesn't mean that when I've talked about it in the past, it's been inauthentic and, to use the word in the way that people use it online, quote unquote, performative. It just means it wasn't integrated on the level of my body yet. And when I read this text post, it obviously immediately made me think of my own experiences, but it also reminded me of a Dear Sugar advice column by Cheryl Strayed called Thwack, 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 where someone writes in saying that they walked in on their partner wearing their panties. And when they saw their partner like slammed the door on them and didn't want them to come in. And the person writing in was like, it was hurtful to me that they slammed the door in my face because I would have been open to talking about, what that desire might be and how we could play with it and whatever. What should I do? And so Cheryl starts telling this story about how when she and her husband got together, her husband started spanking her during sex. And she was a little bit surprised by it. She wasn't really into the spanking, but she was so turned on by the sex itself. She was really into her husband. So she was like, if he likes that, that's fine. We can do that. So for like a month, he's spanking her. And then it gets to the point where she's like getting a little bit annoyed by it because she's like, I don't really like this that much. So this is the conversation that they have. She says, "What turns you on about spanking me?" I finally asked him. "It's sexy," he said with a nonchalant air. "But what's sexy about it to you?" I pressed. "That it turns you on so much," he answered. "That it turns me on so much?" I replied. "Yeah," he said, and his eyes met mine. It didn't take anything more than that. The way our eyes locked, we both understood in a flash that we'd been acting out our own pornographic The Gift of Magi, each of us making a sacrifice that nullified the gift of the other. I no more wanted to be spanked than I wanted to fuck a kangaroo, and vice versa. We were doing it because we thought that's what the other one wanted to do. After we stopped laughing, we traced it back, how we'd come to this misunderstanding. Turns out I'd made a comment on something like day 3 of our relationship that had to do with sex and control. And he took it to mean that I wanted to be punished like a naughty girl in a nunnery, so he spanked the mother-loving breath out of me for a month. Isn't that the sweetest thing you ever heard? Actually, I said, spanking doesn't do a thing for me. What does? He asked. And that is where we began nearly 15 years ago, with his question followed by my answer, with my question followed by his. Okay, so first of all, Cheryl Strayed is just so funny to me. I read this article years ago and it has always stuck in my head. But I love what she said about them realizing that they both were acting out like this pornographic fantasy. And then this line, each of us making a sacrifice that nullified the gift of the other. I think there are so many scripts in our day-to-day life that we play out kind of unconsciously, but like in our sex lives, it's heightened. I feel like sex is this space where all of these themes and such, hashtag themes and such, that I really enjoy talking about, like love, desire, selfishness, etc. All of these things come together and they're embodied and challenged. I do remember having a conversation with my boyfriend where he was saying, I feel like we're still performing for each other, like doing what we think the other person wants, and we're actually safe enough to drop that performance. So that's where I feel like this line of thought about transactional thinking led me to think more about performance. Because there's obviously an element of performance in Cheryl Strayed's story as well. They were both like performing for each other in order to play out these fantasies that they thought the other person had. and in turn sacrificing their sense of pleasure in pursuit of the other person's pleasure. So that's where I was in my thought process when I wrote down performance versus intimacy. But thinking about the fantasy aspect of this conversation, I actually think there is something very intimate about feeling safe enough to perform with another person. Like, part of performance is all about exploration and play. Like, say you have this fantasy that you may or may not feel comfortable telling anyone else. And it's incredibly intimate to do things like role play and sexual experimentation. So I don't know, I feel like my prior instinct to put performance and intimacy on two opposite sides of the spectrum, I'm already like, I actually don't believe that. So let's take this out of the realm of sex for a second to complicate the issue further. When I started thinking about performance, I obviously started thinking about the way that we portray ourselves online, because everyone is trying to figure out what is and isn't performative lately, what trends are performative. People are pointing at other people and saying, you're a performative male, you're a performative intellectual, that's performative reading. I remember there was this person who was a line cook, and they posted themselves on TikTok, and all of the comments were like, you're being performative, you're such a performative line cook, like, oh, you're trying to act like you're in The Bear. But it was like, The Bear is a portrayal of line cooks, and this person is a line cook. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I don't care if something is quote unquote performative, or in other words, inauthentic is really what I think people mean when they say that word. Because I genuinely believe that you have to start as a poser in order to then become the person that you want to be. I believe that we create ourselves, and that often means that you have to pretend to be the person that you want to be before you actually become them. Not to mention, I just think pointing the finger at other people and trying to dictate for them what is and isn't authentic is disingenuous and a waste of time, because you can never be in their lived experience. Like, you can't dictate for another person what is and isn't authentic. You can feel for yourself when something doesn't feel authentic to you, but then it's your responsibility to go find something that does. It's not your responsibility to then try to control this other person's behavior so that it feels authentic to you. Jack Hansen, who's an editor at the Yale Review, has a Substack article titled Performativity, where he's kind of talking about this word and how it's been co-opted, and I really want to dive into it. But the first thing that I will say from this essay is that he says that there's an antisocial quality to the phenomenon of calling things performative. And he says there is something really odious about the adolescent impulse to point out someone else's everyday, ordinary social ambition and to condemn them for it. Someone wants favorable attention. Who doesn't? And this reminded me of a comment that I got in an old episode a while ago that was basically someone bemoaning the fact that I didn't seem authentic, that it seemed like I was reading from a script, and that they would much rather watch someone who's not performing, but making discoveries in real time. And the interesting thing about this criticism, I think, is that this person thought they were asking me to drop the performance and be more authentic, but really what they're asking for is just a better performance, one that they like more. Because the truth is, every single person that is posting online is performing. A total lack of performance doesn't exist, even if you're filming someone without their consent, because that person who is being filmed without their consent is still in public in a social context, which creates a performance. All the world's a stage, if you know what I mean. And I was actually having a conversation with a client who is starting a podcast soon, and she's been like doing practice episodes and then sending them to me for feedback and sharing them with other people in her life for feedback. And in one of these practice episodes, she shared it with her boyfriend, and her boyfriend's feedback was that she's presenting herself in a different way on camera than she does with him. And she came to me thinking that this was a big problem, that she needs to like drop the mask, drop the performance, whatever. And my response was, we can work on making it a better performance, but this camera, this audience of strangers, actually hasn't earned the version of you that you give your close loved ones. And that's okay. There is always going to be a difference, however slight, between the way that you speak to your boyfriend and the way that you speak to the camera. There's just a different level of intimacy there, and that's a natural thing. And I think that there's this obsession with authenticity online that tries to disappear the fact that this is a performance. And I think a performance that tries to hide the fact that it's a performance can very easily become like a delusion or a trap. And that's where it's interesting to think about what the word performative actually even means, because the original use of that word was hijacked to now mean inauthentic, insincere, fake, whatever. But it actually comes from the philosopher J.L. Austin, who was interested in the philosophy of language. And from my understanding, he made this distinction that some words are descriptive, they describe the world around you, and then some words are performative. They actually change the world around you, and he called these performative utterances. Some of the most famous examples are, I now pronounce you husband and wife. That changes some part of your identity. Or I sentence you to 10 years in prison. That changes the conditions of your life. Another one that can be used is you are a woman. You are a man. Judith Butler picked up this idea of performative utterances and then wrote about it more in Gender Trouble and other works. They posit that gender is not this innate quality that's assumed at birth, but something that gets produced and conditioned not only through language, but through our broader cultural customs and expectations. To put it simply, gender is something we do, not something that we just are. In their essay, Performative Acts and Constitution, an essay in phenomenology and feminist theory, they say, as a strategy of survival, gender is a performance with clearly punitive consequences. Discrete genders are part of what humanizes individuals within contemporary culture. Indeed, those who fail to do their gender right are regularly punished, because there is neither an essence that gender expresses or externalizes, nor an objective ideal to which gender aspires, because gender is not a fact. The various acts of gender create the idea of gender, and without those acts, there would be no gender at all. Gender is, thus, a construction that regularly conceals its genesis. So what seems to be a really important sticking point here is that the original use of the word performative did not at all mean fake or insincere or inauthentic. Instead, it meant that it actually did something. As Jack Hansen's essay puts it, the important point here is that nowhere is it suggested that a performative act is fake. To the contrary, it is a central component in the production of our social reality. All it means is that our social reality, the ways we live with and among one another, is open for discussion. Jack talks about how this idea of performativity was actually quite revolutionary at the time. I mean, if you think about it, this idea really helped us get past bioessentialism. And so seeing the term being flattened to simply mean fake is kind of upsetting. Jack says, to use performative as a sneer is evidence of the fascism of thought that has already taken root in our collective intelligence. It is not simply an evolving definition, but a testament to a historic loss. To make this completely clear, the emergence of performativity as a theoretical term in the middle of the 20th century was a genuine advance in modern human self-understanding. It was a moment when the resources of the social sciences were wrested away from the historic function of the legitimation of power and the disciplining of nations and turned towards the cause of freedom. It was part of a civilizational trend, from cultural studies to critical theory to post-structuralism, when the finest minds of the period seemed to converge on a single imperative: you must think for yourself. So there is actually something at the core of performativity, which is about human agency. And this made me think of Alok, who is a poet, comedian, actor, and public speaker, who is gender non-conforming. And I always find myself being really struck by what they have to say, but this clip in particular seemed like it applied.
I think to be an artist is to continually outgrow the story of yourself, and it's to continually implode that awful sentence, I am. To detonate it and obliterate it and twerk it and rework it and rehash it. And we live in a world that art is the antithesis, because this world is a world that requires us to live in categories and pledge allegiance to them. And so what I've had to continue to do in my practice is to continually repeat the mantra to myself: your projection is not my reality. And then in 2024, it's nor my responsibility. I have to liberate myself from the weight of where you want me and ask myself, where am I curious about where I want to go? I think when it came to my career, I love being a stage performer, but I began to wonder, is that because that's the only place people are comfortable with people like me? There's a frame of reference for this, like I'm some sort of freak show. Why can't I be on television or in film? Is that my own agency? And so I had to actually realize and get curious. There are things that I want beyond my own imagination. I think that's what it means to be an artist, is to emancipate your imagination from their ideology.
So in this conversation around performativity as it relates to gender, performativity as it relates to so many aspects of our identity, I look to gender non-conforming people as guides because they've done the deconstruction work. And they're often facing what Judith called punitive consequences to that deconstruction. They're a really powerful example of what it looks like to move through the world with like a pulse on your own agency to live outside of those categories, to want things outside of what you're supposed to want. They stay connected to their bodies and loyal to themselves, even as the outside world tries to punish them for it. And I want to connect this back to where we started, which is sex, because the way that I'm now thinking about performance and performativity has changed since the beginning of this episode, when I was thinking of it more in that colloquial way that we think about it, which is inauthentic. If I'm thinking about performative acts and stepping into a sexual context with an understanding that these performative acts are up for discussion, that opens up like a whole new world for play and exploration than I could have if I stepped into sex with this like rigid understanding of what sex looks like. Like I was saying before, there are so many sexual scripts that we play out, whether we pick this up from porn or sex ed or just the conversations that we have with the people in our lives about sex. But that moment when you take something into the bedroom that you think you're supposed to want or you think you're supposed to do doesn't just mean that you're like failing to be authentic and intimate with your partner. Those things are real influences that have a tangible effect on our experience of sex. But the concept of performativity helps us to see those things as social constructs that are up for discussion. And I think that discussion that comes through performativity is intimacy. So like, for example, say you're playing out the social script that like the woman is supposed to be more submissive than the man, and you're having that sex and you're not enjoying it. The concept of performativity, like the ability to see that dynamic as a social construct that is up for discussion, is what can help start the conversation that will move you towards what will actually feel good. It is, I believe, the start of the ability to make decisions about your own body, how you want other people to touch you, how you want to touch them. If we disassociate performativity from performance, like acting and putting on a show, and instead see it as a series of repetitive day-to-day actions that go unnoticed, we can start to understand performative acts not as acts of deception, but as acts of conditioning. And that begins the work of deconditioning, which is an inherently, I think, very intimate process. And this makes me think of an audiobook that I listened to a while ago called The Art of Receiving and Giving, The Wheel of Consent by Betty Martin. It has a lot of really great exercises for anyone that's looking to improve their relationship with sex. But she says, if you want to improve the quality of your experience of touch, the place to put your attention is not on the touch. It's on the choosing. I have seen many people, including myself, skate over the opportunity to choose. And then, if the touch is less than inspiring, try to like it more. Instead, if you attend to the process of noticing what you want and communicating, the quality of your experience vastly improves. First, it is empowering. You are choosing what happens instead of going along with whatever someone else is doing. Second, it tenderizes the heart. The process of choosing makes us notice our vulnerability and brings us right to the present moment. If it's for you, you are choosing what you want. If it's for the other person, you are choosing what you are genuinely okay with. If you're going along with whatever is happening, the exact same touch becomes dull, suspect, or worse, even if you're trying to like it. There are 4 steps: noticing, trusting, valuing, and communicating. The degree to which you can slow yourself down so that you can notice, trust, value, and communicate is the degree to which you will stop trying to like what is done to you and instead have what you actually want. And Betty talks about this 3-minute game that she does where there are 2 questions. One is, how do you want me to touch you for 3 minutes? And the other is, how do you want to touch me for 3 minutes? And then it's this discussion about what both people are genuinely willing and excited to give and receive. And she says that this is not really like a sexual practice. Like, this is not a sexual exercise. Everyone keeps their clothes on. A lot of the times it's with strangers. It's like kind of awkward. So you have to really be honest with yourself about what your limits are. And that's part of what's really important about the process, is defining and communicating your limits. But she spends a lot of this book talking about how hard it is for people to really get in touch with what they want, how they want to be touched. Like, people have such a hard time answering that question, because how we will be touched and how we'll touch other people is so often this assumed thing. But at the end of the day, it's a social script that you can like tease apart. It's not an inevitability when we turn a certain age that we're going to want to be touched in a certain way. And part of this conversation that has been really interesting to me outside of an online presence, outside of sex, is just the connection that you can have with your body personally. In your own personal day-to-day decisions, being able to have a felt sense of your body, to feel embodied, often requires what Alok was talking about before, which is this disintegration of that I am. And I was listening to this podcast called On Being, the episode with David Whyte. I listened to it like 3 times in a row. I was going on a walk and like pausing every couple of minutes just to absorb what was being said. Honestly, such a great way to commune with whatever you're listening to. But I was taking notes as I was on my walk. And at one point he says, it's astonishing how much time humans spend abstracting themselves from the lived experience of their bodies, which I think just hit me at the right time. When I heard that, it was already on my mind how I want to be more conscious of the sensations of my body as I'm making decisions throughout the day, and let that be more of a guiding light than other people's expectations of me, the social scripts that I'm playing out, whatever. So I'm going to end this episode with one of his poems because it feels tangentially related. And I don't know if it will be as clear to y'all why this is related, but I'll try to talk about it at the end. But it says, your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone, as if life were a progressive and cunning crime with no witness to the tiny hidden transgressions. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. Surely even you at times have felt the grand array, the swelling presence, and the chorus crowding out your solo voice. You must note the way the soap dish enables you, or the window latch grants you freedom. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. The stairs are your mentor of things to come. The doors have always been there to frighten you and invite you, and the tiny speaker on the phone is your dream ladder to divinity. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. The kettle is singing even as it pours you a drink. The cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness and seen the good in you at last. All the birds and creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything is waiting for you. And the title of that poem is Everything is Waiting for You. I realize I didn't say that at the beginning. But I think that line, alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity, kind of weirdly gets to the heart of what I'm trying to say. Like, being alert to the performative acts that we play out on a repetitive basis that are going unnoticed. Being alert to those things can be windows to connection, not only with ourselves, but with our loved ones as well. And I don't know, maybe I'm crazy and that doesn't actually feel connected at all, but as I was on my walk taking notes on this episode, I was like, this feels weirdly very connected to what I'm thinking about. Anyway, that was my very long-winded way of making the point that I don't think that performativity and intimacy are incompatible. I'd love to know your thoughts. And again, go check out my new vlog channel if you're wanting something silly and goofy as a little palate cleanser after this episode. All right. I love you. I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye.